Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're running a thought experiment, and it's a really powerful one. What if you could surgically remove one single ingredient from world history?
Not something obvious like oil or steel.
No, not at all. Something, seemingly simple, something we all eat every day, probably without a second thought. Refined sugar, specifically from cane and beet.
Right. And it sounds like it could be a fun little culinary exercise, but it's
Right.
so much more. The sources we've looked at, the economic histories, cultural studies, health data, they all point to the same thing.
Which is what?
That sugar is far more than just a flavor. It was a foundational economic structure. It was a driver of colonialism, a massive demographic force. It literally shaped global borders and the movement of peoples for centuries.
The complexity there is it's fascinating. I saw one source summarize its dual nature perfectly. It calls sugar both a gain and a wound for humanity.
That's a great way to put it.
Because if you pull that one thread out of the tapestry of history, the result isn't some perfect utopia, but it's not a complete dystopia either. It's just fundamentally different.
And that's really the mission for you listening to this, to grasp the sheer scale of the interconnected changes that this one absence would cause. Changes that run from the darkest parts of colonial history right into your coffee cup this morning.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the history, right?
Right.
How did this white crystalline powder go from being a medieval luxury, something only kings could afford, to an absolute industrial essential that dominated global trade?
Well, the initial factor, the thing that kicked it all off was something really dry and economic. Efficiency.
Efficiency.
Exceptional efficiency. Sugarcane is a marvel of a tropical plant. In the right climate, it delivers an enormous, almost unparalleled amount of calories and, more importantly, wealth per acre of land. For centuries, it was the single most profitable cash crop European powers could get their hands on.
And that profitability, that economic efficiency became the engine.
Exactly. It generated the incredible amounts of capital needed to build out these huge plantation economies that you saw spring up across the Caribbean, Brazil, and other tropical regions, all under European colonial rule, of course.
And this is where we get to the wound part of the equation.
This is where the historical wound truly opens up. The sources are definitive on this point. The scale of wealth that sugar could generate was, well, it was impossible to achieve without the vast, brutal infrastructure of enslaved labor.
So sugar didn't just use the transatlantic slave trade.
No, it provided the colossal financial incentive that made it explode. It ballooned that trade to devastating historic levels, driving the forced movement of millions of people across the Atlantic.
It's a truly terrible connection, but it's so fundamental to understanding our modern world. Is why historians have spent so much time on this. We see it in some of the classic academic works the sources cite.
Absolutely. Two really stand out. First, you have Sidney Mintz's book, Sweetness and Power, which looked at not just the economics, but the whole social and cultural shift. You know, how sugar went from this elite status symbol to something everyone had to have, and how that shaped the diet and the daily lives of ordinary people.
And then there's the big economic one. Eric Williams' Capitalism and Slavery.
A huge thesis. And his argument is that the capital, the profit, derived directly from that slave-driven sugar economy was instrumental. A crucial source of early investment, really, that was needed to help fuel the Industrial Revolution, especially in Great Britain.
It's a powerful idea, and still debated, of course, because it ties this sweet little commodity directly to the biggest economic shift in modern history.
It does. And if you remove sugar, you remove that very specific, very early source of industrial capital. A major financial driver for that early boom in the UK and France just disappears.
Okay, so let's pivot. Let's move from that reality into the hypothetical. If sugarcane and its cold weather cousin, the sugar beet, vanished, what changes structurally in global agriculture?
Well, for one, those millions of acres of prime tropical land wouldn't just sit empty.
There's still demand for other things.
Exactly. Demand for tropical goods is still there, so they would pivot. But, and this is the key difference, the rate of return changes everything. Instead of sugarcane, they'd focus on other crops like coffee, cocoa, tobacco, maybe even rice, or scaled-up cattle ranching.
So you might still have plantation agriculture, but without that explosive high-margin product like sugar, the whole model is just less dominant. And I guess the demand for such intensely concentrated labor would go down.
Yeah, that's the clear implication from the sources, yes. And we can't forget the other half of this, the sugar beet.
Ah, right.
The sources note that the entire sugar beet industry, which was pushed really hard across Europe after Napoleon's blockades cut off cane supplies, it would never have happened. That's a huge technological and agricultural loss for Central and Eastern Europe, for Russia, places that really rely on beet sugar today.
So strategically, what happens to the colonies themselves? The ripples must spread pretty wide.
The impact on imperial ambition is profound. Colonies like Barbados, Jamaica, these places were enormous sources of wealth for European empires, almost entirely because of sugar. Suddenly, they become much less profitable,
And therefore less important.
much less strategically vital. Their entire status flips. They go from being these indispensable economic engines to, much less crucial outposts.
So the European powers, always looking for that return on investment, would shift their capital, their focus, somewhere else. Where would that attention go?
They'd pivot to other ways of generating wealth. It could mean a more intense focus on mining for minerals in Africa, maybe happening sooner than it did historically, or a massive scale-up of different products out of India and Southeast Asia, things like opium, cotton, spices, rubber. The capital still flows, just through different channels.
Which brings us back to the Industrial Revolution and that Williams thesis. If that specific flood of sugar money disappears, do we stall out the factories and the steam engines?
And this is a really critical nuance in the sources. While that huge injection of capital from sugar vanishes, the Industrial Revolution would still occur.
Okay.
It was also being driven by advances in mining, in metallurgy, global trade, and other goods, and crucially, just the invention of steam power itself. The revolution wasn't solely dependent on sugar. However,
The timing would change?
the timeline, yes, and the intensity of that early expansion might be dramatically slower. Maybe it's delayed by decades.
Which means the entire economic profile of those port cities that grew into powerhouses on sugar, I'm thinking of places like Bristol, Liverpool, Nantes in France, would be fundamentally different.
Completely different. They might specialize in cotton or tobacco, sure, but that specific sugar-fueled wealth that built so much of their infrastructure, their merchant fleets, that's gone. It's a total rewrite of maritime economic geography.
Let's move from these big global structures down to the personal. How would a sugar-free world change our day-to-day lives? If you take away refined sugar, how do we satisfy that basic human craving for sweetness?
We definitely wouldn't live in a tasteless world. We'd just rely on the traditional, natural alternatives that existed long before mass-produced sugar, the things that were culturally dominant for millennia.
So what's on the shopping list in this new sweet pantry?
Honey, of course. That was the main sweetener in Europe and the Mediterranean for ages. But also things like molasses made from dates or grapes, super important in the Middle East. You'd see more maple syrup in North America, and a huge reliance on sweetness from dried fruits or from nut pastes like marzipan.
Would be our entire idea of confectionery it changes completely. The whole world of refined sweets, of industrial pastry, the ability to crystallize sugar into specific shapes, that all shrinks dramatically.
Desserts would pivot entirely. They'd be much heavier, relying more on fats, nuts, spices, and fruit sugars for flavor. Think of dense, traditional marzipan or fat-heavy baked goods. That lightness, that crunch we get from modern refined sugar desserts, largely absent.
Okay, let's talk about two specific products that really define modern indulgence: chocolate and rum.
Right. Well, if you take away cheap refined sugar, chocolate stays bitter. The sources are pretty clear that the popular sweet mass-market chocolate bar we all know today, it just never becomes a mainstream thing. Chocolate consumption probably stays as an elite or ceremonial activity where it was for centuries.
And then the liquor cabinet takes a big hit, too.
A huge hit. Rum is distilled directly from sugarcane byproducts. No sugarcane, no rum. That entire category of alcohol just vanishes.
Wow.
We'd rely more on spirits made from grain or potatoes, whiskey, vodka, gin, but that distinct tropical spirit would be completely missing.
Even small daily rituals would change. British tea culture, Indian chai culture, both often rely on adding spoonfuls of white sugar.
Those traditions would have evolved differently. They'd rely on milk, on spices like cardamom or ginger, or maybe a little bit of honey for sweetness instead.
And this connects directly to today, doesn't it? The sources point out that the whole ready-made packaged food industry loses a lot of its appeal without cheap refined sugar.
It's the cheapest, most scalable source of flavor and energy there is. The entire development of modern snack culture, sugary cereals, snack bars, mass-market ice cream, it would all be vastly limited, if it existed at all. It's hard to picture the modern supermarket without that aisle.
Okay, let's turn to the health scorecard. It seems, pretty obvious that removing sugar would lead to some clear wins for public health. What are the certain benefits?
Oh, the health benefits would be profound and immediate. We would definitely see a major drop in dental caries or tooth decay. That link is incredibly strong. More significantly, a probable reduction in the global rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes, given how much sugar and sugary drinks drive calorie surplus.
And there's a more recent epidemic that's tied specifically to how we metabolize these sugars.
That's right. Liver health. We'd almost certainly see a huge impact there. Removing high concentrations of fructose, especially from things like high fructose corn syrup, would likely lead to a big reduction in non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or NAFLD, and that's a growing global crisis.
Right, so fewer of those associated metabolic syndrome issues that link obesity and diabetes to heart problems and even cancer risks. This world is sounding medically much better.
It does, but this is where we have to bring in that critical nuance. The health picture isn't purely utopian. We have to think about the trade-offs.
You can't just remove a source of cheap calories without some consequence, especially for vulnerable people.
Exactly. What does that loss of accessibility mean? If people just replace refined sugar with an excess of processed starches and cheap fats to get that same satisfaction, you'd just see new disease patterns emerge.
A different set of problems.
A different set, yes. But maybe more acutely, taking away cheap, dense carbohydrates could lead to actual calorie deficits in, say, low-income urban populations globally who came to rely on sugar for quick, affordable energy.
It's a very sobering reminder that health is always connected to the whole system, to diet, poverty, lifestyle, not just removing one single bad ingredient.
The solution is never that simple.
Let's quickly close the loop on technology and the environment. What kind of machines or industries just wouldn't exist in this sugar-free world?
Well, the highly specialized machinery for sugar refining, the complex systems for crystallization and separation to get that pure white sugar, they would never have evolved. And for preserving fruit, instead of high sugar jams, methods like drying, smoking, and fermentation would be much more globally dominant.
But, as the sources stressed, the core of the Industrial Revolution, the steam engine, textile mills, coal, and iron, that all would have developed anyway, regardless of where the early capital came from. Sugar was a multiplier, not the foundation.
Exactly. And environmentally, you'd see less deforestation in the Caribbean, for sure. But we have to be realistic. The human drive for intensive agriculture doesn't just go away.
The pressure just shifts.
It shifts.
Yeah.
The demand for cash crops would just move to other products like palm oil or soy or massive cattle ranching in other vulnerable ecosystems. The environment might win locally in one place, but the global ecological pressure just migrates.
So what does this all mean? Our thought experiment, a world without sugar, proves that this one commodity truly shaped global power. It dictated labor, it defined our taste, and it permanently altered our health, for better and for worse.
It really holds a mirror up to human nature, doesn't it? It reflects our creativity, our economic drive, our capacity for exploitation, and our universal search for satisfaction. The story of sugar really is the story of globalization.
The sources conclude that sugar was both a gain and a wound, but they also bring up one final fascinating point about our social structure.
They do. Given how central sugar is to the modern convenience, food, and snack industries that really depend on globalized, homogenized products, its absence might have dramatically slowed down the rate of global cultural homogenization.
You mean because fast food culture relies so heavily on it?
It relies heavily on those cheap, scalable sugar and syrup products. Without them, how quickly would global tastes have converged? And would the absence of that massive, cheap energy source have altered global social equality? That's the lingering question for you to explore.